You're listening to the Faith and Other Oddities podcast, brought to you by the Raven Creek Social Club, where we talk about faith and other oddities. For questions, comments, or to be part of the conversation, join us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, where you can find us at Raven Creek SC. Now for your hosts, Emily Dixon and Nathan Underwood.
So I was talking to my boss the other day. He and I chat quite a bit whenever we get the chance. We haven't had a whole lot of opportunity lately because he's been really busy this year, but we were talking about funeral things and grave plots. And I told him, I said, hey, interesting story about that is my mom, one year on my birthday, bought me a funeral plot. And he gave me a really funny look. And I was like, well, there's more to that story. She didn't just, I didn't make her mad.
Way more to the story.
So, he's like, you've got to say that on your podcast. So here I am, doing this for my boss. So he can be amused as, and hear the rest of the story.
I say, because you got to go. There's more than just a funeral plot.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to really go into the full details of the story. As you know, but not many other people know, our dad passed away 4 days before my birthday in 2014. And when Mom went to buy the grave plot for Dad, there was 4 plots next to it, 3 or 4 next to it.
I think there was there's a total of 6.
Total of 6. And if you bought more than one, you got a discount. So Mom,
being the bargain hunter she is,
Mom just went right on ahead and bought all of those grave plots. And then later that day, so the funeral home that we went with, Mom wanted to use this like old Western style, like
a toe pincher,
the 6-sided coffins, which if it's 6-sided, it's a coffin. If it's not, it's a casket. So there's your technical difference. Here's your
trivia for the day.
Useless trivia for the day. And so anyway, but because it wasn't like a regular company that they use, and they said their insurance wouldn't cover it if there was any damage. And, they're also family friends because we did grow up in a small town.
We're actually related. I don't know how we...
I didn't realize. So anyway, they asked if we would be willing to uncrate it. I'm like, you know what? I've worked in a warehouse. I don't even care. So somewhere, Emily, I may have them too, somewhere there's actually pictures of me uncrating Dad's coffin
on your birthday.
On my birthday. So anyway, to make the story better, because it doesn't really the story's just kind of bleh, but it gets better because as I was going throughout the day, I tweeted, Mom just bought my funeral plot, hashtag happy birthday to me. And then later I said, just got done uncrating my dad's coffin, hashtag happy birthday to me. And what's really funny is some Twitter bot latched hold of the hashtag happy birthday to me and responded like this autoresponder with this crazy, like these crazy cat emojis that were like all drawn up using all the punctuation characters. I mean, they're very elaborate, but it was just so funny because like you could tell they obviously were supposed to have like confetti and things like that. And I'm like, I feel like this is inappropriate. But that's kind of how things go around our lives sometimes.
Well, we were actually at that time, Ty and I were talking about, what we wanted done when we died and all of that good stuff. And he's like, oh, I just want you to scatter my ashes. And I said, no. I said, you have a funeral plot. And he goes, what? I mean, a cemetery plot. And he says, what do you mean? I said, no, Mom bought us one today. And he said, well, actually a few days before. And he said, well, where was it? And I said, you were sitting on it about 5 minutes ago. So
that's pretty funny.
Yeah, we had some, that whole time was, if you don't get our family's morbid sense of humor, I think it kind of something.
Yeah, that's one of our defense mechanisms that we developed pretty early on. So yeah, but that's the story of that. So I know roughly where I'm going to be buried. I mean, we're pretty sure we're going to do cremation because it's just so much cheaper than a casket and things like that. And I'm not using my body anymore.
Harvest what you can, donate my organs.
Hey, if they can find anything they can use, after my mid-20s,
Yeah.
they can have it.
Yeah, pretty much. Whatever. And that's the thing. If you look at the cemetery plots, it's they can do the cremation. They can put more than one person in the plot. I forget how many they said they can go up to.
Yeah, I think isn't that the plan? We're gonna stack everybody up and just
Yeah, I think 6 was way more than we needed.
Yeah.
So
hey, the kids are taken care of.
Yeah, I mean, one less thing we have to worry about.
So
of all the things in life to be prepared for, this is the one we have covered.
We're set. Yeah, we final destination for both our parts, body and soul, covered.
Done. Okay, so we don't have to worry about anything else.
Yep. I'm gonna close up shop.
Yeah, works.
See you later. No. So what are we talking about today aside from funeral plots?
We're talking
cemetery
about
plots.
We are actually talking about the Divine Council Worldview. And we decided to hit this one early because this is going to impact the way we read so much of the Bible.
Right. And reading the Bible is what we're going to do here. So it's not a major player in a lot. I mean, I don't know. It is, but it isn't. It's one of those things that
it doesn't impact the message of faith and salvation.
Right. Yeah. Gospel message is basically the same. It doesn't change the gospel message, but it's kind of like, to me, it's like watching the trailer versus watching the movie.
Yeah, because it does. It blows open. Like so many of the stories, you'll read them, you'll go, okay, I get basically what's happening here and what people are thinking, or you think you do. And then you add this element in and all of a sudden it's like, oh, wow. Because what I think is so weird about it, it decreases the importance of humanity and simultaneously increases the importance of humanity in these really weird ways.
Yeah.
And
yeah, it makes humanity, just kind of like you said, it really makes us less central to the story in some ways and makes God more central to the story. Mm-hmm. But the way he chooses to interact with us, it makes us more beloved, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I think that's right. And also, I think it makes sense of, the big critique going around about the Bible right now is that the Old Testament God is so mean, he's awful, how could he destroy these entire nations? And when you have this in play, all of a sudden that makes sense, and it actually becomes an act of mercy for those who love him. And so we're going to kind of get into some of that, and I think we're also going to be talking, we're not going to get into it real deep, but when we talk about the stories in the future,
right?
Then you're going to see, oh, wait a minute. Now all of a sudden this isn't just God being this big tyrant and horrible bully. There's actually purpose behind it. And so I think it's, for me, it just made the Bible more vibrant.
Yeah.
I think it's a good way to put it.
Yeah. So what we're talking about is Divine Council Worldview. You'll also hear this referred to sometimes as the Deuteronomy 32 worldview. If any one of you have been listening to any of Dr. Heiser's stuff. Yeah,
because we're not the experts on this.
We are not the experts. We just want to give a brief introduction that's in simple language. And then if you want to know more, definitely go to, is it drmsh.com? Mm-hmm. Or is it nakedbiblepodcast.com?
Both will get you there.
Okay. And then there's a start here link where he really dives into that. So
that's on the Naked Bible, and he actually has diagrams and pictures, and he gets really in depth. And I actually spent more time deciding what I wasn't including in this than what I included in it, because once you start seeing the threads, then they're going to be everywhere. And as we read through the Bible, we'll say, hey, this is how it ties in, because we were talking about Hannah the other day, and I won't even reveal all of that, but you miss it in the English, and it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, so we'll be getting into some of that later on. That's actually, I think, after we kind of wrap up the next couple topics, I think we're just going to start going through Old Testament stories.
That makes me happy.
Makes me happy, too, because it's so much fun stuff in the Old Testament. So you're the one who did most of the prep work on this, so I'm going to let you kind of...
Well, you were wrestling with technical problems.
Oh, my goodness. So last night, just to kind of give you an idea, what's going on. We've got an interview that I'm in the process of editing down. It'll be out on the 25th, and we'll be announcing who it was later. But about an hour and a half before the interview started, my operating system on my Mac just went kaput. And so I had to do like a complete system restore and everything 45 minutes before we were getting ready for this Skype interview with someone that we barely know. So we didn't want to put them off. So I'm like just scrambling. My brain is just reeling, trying to figure this all out.
And I'm just hiding, basically.
And oh man. Yeah. And so it took a minute. We made it through, and we had a great time last night. So that will be coming up, and we will be announcing that later on.
So, okay, Divine Council Worldview, the best and easiest place to start, and I'm taking my cues from Dr. Heiser here, is actually Psalms 82:1. And the verse is simply this: God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. So, okay, if we really stop and think about that and process through that and not just read this as like we're want to do as Christians, what the heck is the divine council? And how many gods are there, and why is God in the middle of them?
Right. Well, so, okay, well, let's start with that. Let's start with the bird's eye view of what's the divine council. Just give us the breakdown on basically what it is.
Well, and okay, so the divine council is made up of the Elohim, and that's a little e, not a big E, because most of you know that Elohim is also a name for God. This is a spiritual being. This can be what we refer to as angels. It can be a departed person, their spirit.
Yeah, disembodied dead.
Disembodied dead. God is an Elohim, the God of the Bible. However, he is the only Yahweh, the only true God. So this council serves with God in heaven, and it mediates between humanity and what's going on in the heavens. And we see this, there's the story of Ahab's death.
Mm-hmm.
I love this story. It's one of my favorites because it's kind of like a scene from The Godfather. I can just see God, like, how are we going to whack him? And
right.
this.
Well, do you want to go over that story so it doesn't sound so weird and out of place?
Yeah, because you derailed my my notes here.
Well,
I just dropped.
We're not going certainly. We're not just staying right on the outline. I mean,
we never stay.
These
right
are just. I just organized these so you would know what verses go with which point, because there's a lot of stuff here. What do you got? Like 6 pages?
I think there's 8 actually.
Did you take away my page numbers?
No, I printed it exactly as you had it. So
I guess I put page numbers on the other one.
First Kings 22 verses 13 through 29. So that's a pretty lengthy passage there. And basically, God has said that Ahab's going to die. This has been prophesied by Elijah a long time before this is going down. But we really don't know how it's going to happen. And God's sitting in the heavens, and he says, how are we going to get this done? Mm-hmm. And one of the spirits, and that's how the ESV has it translated, one of the spirits steps forward and said, hey, I'm going to tell all the prophets, put a lying spirit in the mouths of all the prophets, and they're going to tell Ahab that he's going to win this particular battle. And there's only one prophet who knows the truth, and he actually goes in and tells Ahab and the other king who's with him, hey, this is what God did. And Ahab chooses to disregard the true prophet. And sure enough, the way the true prophet just said he was going to die is exactly how Ahab dies. And so this is in the Bible. This is not something external or, a folklore that is written around the Bible. This is in the Bible. Revelation, we talk about the elders at the throne. We talk about a heavenly host. Mm-hmm. And so this is part of Christian vernacular. To call it a divine council makes them a little more interactive with God.
Right. They're not just a bunch of people lined up cheering. They're not like the cheerleading squad, because that's actually kind of the image you kind of get of angels in Sunday school. They just stand around and praise God all day. And, I think there's definitely, a lot of praising and a lot of worship that goes on. But again, it kind of depends on how you define worship. But we just kind of get this idea that the angels are just, there's God's throne, he's there, and there's like angels on either side of the walkway, like, runway lights, just, singing and cheering all day like a group of divine cheerleaders.
Yeah, and so this takes it out of that kind of abstraction, which probably comes more from Renaissance paintings than the actual biblical text. And so we've got this divine council in Psalms 82.
Yeah, because puto are not cherubs.
True.
For anyone who doesn't know what puto are, those are those little wing baby things that you see in Renaissance paintings. Those are not actually supposed to be angels or cherubs. Those are a lot of them are actually derived from like Bacchus.
Mm-hmm. More Greek mythology than Bible.
Anyway, I digress.
Randomness. But if you go on and you read in Psalms 82, and I did notice that in 28 of the major translations, only 3 don't have this general translation. And that's a really good way to study your Bible. If you don't know Hebrew and Greek, go to Bible Hub, pull up a verse,
right,
and look at it in the several translations. If you've got all of them saying basically the same thing, then there's no dispute. If you got 3 or 4, pretty much a little debate, but not dispute. But you start getting up to 8, 9, 10 verses. Now you know you're into a particularly hard passage of Hebrew or Greek to translate. Mm-hmm. And so this kind of gives you an idea that maybe there's more to the story here. But anyway, this is kind of almost undisputed. Psalms 82:6 says, "You are gods." This is God speaking. "You are gods, sons of the Most High. All of you, nevertheless, like men, shall die and fall like any prince." So God's saying that these beings, these divine council beings, are nevertheless, despite the fact that you are spiritual, you're going to die like men. Why do you have to die like men? Because you aren't men. You're not human. So you've got to be something else. And if you need a little bit more proof that this is actually how it works, Psalms 89, 5-7 says, "Let the heavens praise your wonder, O Lord, your faithfulness in the assembly of the holy ones. For who in the skies can compare to the Lord? Who among the heavenly beings is like the Lord? God is greatly to be feared in the council of the holy ones, and awesome above all who are around him." So in the sky, in the heavens, holy ones, heavenly beings, this divine council is not of the earth. And this is where we start getting into some of the controversy about this view, because now we're starting to get in, out of those 28 versions I've looked at, 9 of them have heavenly beings, and the rest of them all have sons of might or sons of the mighty. And now we're kind of going, okay, who are the sons of might and who are the sons of the mighty? And that's where having a little bit of Hebrew comes in. And this is actually sons of Elim. This is another name for God. And now that word mighty can apply to men. It can apply to animals. It can apply to the mountains. But it also applies very interestingly to the gods of other nations. And we find that in Daniel 11:36. "And the king shall do as he wills. He shall exalt himself above every god and shall speak astonishing things against the God of gods." Exodus 15:11, "Who is like you, O Lord, among the gods? Who like you, majestic in holiness, aware, awesome in glorious, awesome in glorious deeds, doing wonders." That's the song of Moses after they've crossed the Red Sea. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be important. And
are you talking about 32? Deuteronomy 32, the Song of Moses?
No, that's Deuteronomy 32. This is Exodus 15. This is right after the Red Sea. But overwhelmingly, and I didn't even look these up, this is just the name of God. And it's the sons of Elim, the sons of Elohim, are the heavenly beings. They are members of the Divine Council. And so over and over again, when we have that construction, sons of God, what we're looking at are divine beings and members of the Divine Council.
Right.
So now,
go
ahead. Sometimes there's like this weird little telepathic link because we are siblings, and then other times it just totally malfunctions. So
I thought you were looking at me like I was about to say something. So the well, I mean, I could say something. I mean, because we could go on and on and on with a lot of things, a lot of examples. But one of them that I really like was that really points out when God talks about judgment. You talked about that in Psalm 82. Another place where we see that is in Exodus, where God's I'm paraphrasing, and I don't know the exact verse if you have it, where he says, "This night I will take revenge upon the gods of Egypt."
Yeah.
And we like to think that the Bible is strictly monotheistic, and so we want to say, oh well, ancient cultures, they had these ideas of God, they had these images, they had some imagined creatures, but God's saying, no, I'm going to take revenge. Well, that's not something you do on an imagined creature. And I think, was it Heiser who says, you don't say that you're better or you're going to take revenge on Donald Duck,
right,
or Santa Claus, anything like that. It's not. It's an erroneous statement. It's a nonsensical statement for God to say he's going to take vengeance on the gods.
Well, and that's one of the points that most people have a problem with. They're saying, oh, well, now you're saying that the Bible is polytheistic. And because if you're going to say Elohim are these divine beings, then we must be talking about more than one God. And that's the problem. They're either polytheistic or henotheistic. And henotheistic means that there might be many gods, but there's one ultimate God that's above everyone else. And
well, I would say real quick, because that's actually one of the thoughts I had is a lot of times when people kind of stumble on this or are presented with it, the tendency is to run away or to try to explain it or reason it away. And for me, whenever I heard Dr. Heiser really going into this, I never heard anyone completely breaking it down. And Thomas Cahill in The Gifts of the Jews was the first place I came across this, that it's speculated by many scholars that the early Jews were henotheistic, that they believed that Yahweh was the ultimate creator God and that there were other beings controlling other nations, but you only worshipped Yahweh.
Well, and I think that's kind of comes from this misunderstanding of God being so much greater than the other gods.
Right.
And because I think Israel really was monotheistic, but it still recognized that there's other spiritual forces at play out there. And it did not give them the right to challenge or somehow be considered even a threat to God. And so this is what kept Israel monotheistic and not henotheistic, is the fact that God is so far above the other gods.
Right.
And that there's not even, in Christian theology, sometimes we kind of even almost become henotheistic when we start seeing God and Satan in this duel, and we know God's going to win, but it's going to be close.
Right, and yeah, that's actually kind of more of a Gnostic influence that was kind of a carryover from the early days of Marcion,
Zoroastrianism. Yes,
yeah,
that duality there, and that's the thing. There's no contest. That's the distinction. And I think if you're looking at it strictly from a historian's point of view and not a theologian's, then like Cahill was doing, then you start to begin to get this idea that there's this progression from polytheism or pantheism into henotheism and then to monotheism. But that's one of the things that most theological scholars kind of push back against. That may have been the progression for Egypt, but it's not the progression for Judaism. And so, when you read the story of Abraham and Jacob, God is God, and no one's coming close to him.
Right. No, but yeah, there was a book I read, I think it was just called Abraham. Picked it up at a library sale for 50 cents or something. And it was pretty interesting because they were talking about how, as cultures progress, you can reveal to a person what makes sense to them in their culture. And there's actually a couple theories running around, and I don't know how, I don't really buy into them that much, that when Yahweh first presented himself to Abram, that's how they were, that's how I read the book, they referred to him as Abram and not Abraham, or Abram, it was the V sound, that when God first revealed himself, he presented himself kind of like one of the ancestral gods, and then slowly progressed to reveal himself to be more and more powerful to Abram. And you can almost kind of see that in the narrative, but I don't really fully buy that God would have put himself off as like an ancestral God.
I think there's kind of element of where God is pushing Abraham to see him as more than he'd ever seen any other God as being. And probably, it's God. He's really good at making concessions to our humanity. But yeah, I don't think he was posing as an ancestral God.
No, yeah, that's what I say. I don't buy that, but I'm saying that that's something that I've seen, and that was from a non-Christian writer. That was just someone looking at the documents, and there was a lot of interesting speculation in that. But yeah, that's getting way off track.
Well,
sorry.
and that's the thing. Whenever a lot of people who've pushed back against this will say that we are trying to badmouth God, that we're trying to say that he is less because there might be other gods out there. But I mean, if you look at the first commandment and strip away what you know and just read, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me."
Yeah, God's not talking about the Mustang you polish every weekend, or whatever fancy car you like. That was just a story I heard someone tell once.
The television is your God.
Yeah, well, and you can definitely devote too much time to television, but at the same time, I think it's important to note when Heiser was talking about it, how when we hear the word God, God, to quote Heiser, we think of the specific divine attributes of Yahweh, and when someone in the early ancient Near East culture would have heard it, they would have thought of simply someone who inhabits the spiritual realm. And what does he say? It's a place of residence, and not so much a list of attributes.
Yeah, more of an address. That basically, if you're not a physical, tangible being, then you're residing in the realm of the Elohim. And even with, there's a great story with Saul and the Witch of Endor, and she calls Samuel as he comes up from the ground, "I see an Elohim."
Right.
And so this disembodied spirit, there's other places in Isaiah where the dead kings are recognized as Elohim. And so we've got some very interesting things that we kind of lost, because in the English, it's really hard to do that one-for-one kind of equivalency.
Right.
Anybody who speaks another language knows that there's just certain things that you cannot translate succinctly into the second language. And that's the same thing with the Bible. Translators are doing their best. Mm-hmm. It's not always easy. So we've got all these passages, and if you want to know more, like I said, check out Heiser. He's got the Naked Bible podcast. He's got the Unseen Realm, and then he has a website documenting all of his sources, the peer-reviewed articles. And when we say peer-reviewed, these are articles that were written by experts and then vetted by other experts.
Right.
And so this isn't just somebody who said, "Hey, I had this crazy dream and I think I understand the nature of the universe now." This is literally someone who spent years pouring into gathering all of these sources and then being double checked by other people who have spent years pouring into all of these sources.
Right. And it's really interesting that one of the main objections is that it detracts from God's power, because to me it's like, well, what makes God more powerful? Him having control over lifeless matter of the universe, or him having control over other spirits that he put in control of those things? It's not, no matter how many layers of authority and power you stack up between us and God, it doesn't make him any less powerful. He's at the top, as long as you're willing to end there. Mm-hmm. I don't see. To me, it doesn't make sense that it's a big issue, or that it detracts from his glory at all.
I don't think that it does. I think that there's a saying, something along the lines that you can tell how great a man is by the quality of his enemies, or something along those lines.
I'm not sure I'm familiar with that one. Go ahead.
But it's kind of that same mindset to me, that the idea that if God is going to be able to control great and powerful beings, then he has to be that much greater than them. And, let's face it, humanity isn't really a big threat to God if you have an idea of him really being holy. And so now that we've kind of moved on, we've kind of shown a little bit of examples of where the Bible's talked about the divine council. Psalms 82, Psalms 89, Psalms 27 is another one.
Oh, one other thing before we get on that. One of the other objections that we hear a lot, that Dr. Heiser says he hears a lot, is, well, why would God need to do that? Why does he need a divine council to run things?
Why does he need anything?
And yeah, that kind of goes back to a point. I don't remember if it was the interview with Joe where I was talking about this, or an episode or two later, but it's like, he doesn't need anything. God is God. He's complete in and of himself. Why does he need the universe? He doesn't. He does it because that's how he likes to do things. And I love that Heiser makes that point. But that's just how he chooses to do it, and it goes back to what I was saying. Once you realize the universe is superfluous, God could have made it any way he wanted to, and he doesn't have to answer to us every single thing that he does. And so whenever we do find out something is not how we thought it was, it's incumbent on us to go, oh, I was wrong. I want to correct my beliefs, and not to go, oh, the Bible must be wrong here, or the interpreters must be wrong here. And what's funny, though, is because most of the people who wind up falling on the interpreters must be wrong, or the Bible's wrong, are the ones who are most adamant for often, the inerrancy view of Scripture versus infallibility.
Well, yeah, and especially on this, because the first objection they're going to bring is, well, Elohim in Psalms 89 and 82, that's just elders of Israel. Right. And Heiser does a really great job of breaking down all the grammatical and linguistic reasons of why that's not possible. I'm going to break it down real simple. So basically, anytime that the elders and judges of Israel are referred to as Elohim, supposedly, it's this idea that something is going on and people need a legal decision. And so whether it's something has been broken or stolen while it was you gave your neighbor your cat to watch and the cat gets run off, and so the neighbor's going to sue you, all of that kind of stuff. Not that they had cats, but I'm trying to contextualize it. Okay.
I'm like, that's on the cat.
So
I'm sorry, if you own a cat, you know that's on the cat.
But the other thing is, yes, you don't control cats. Or whenever you've got a slave and you're going to, the slave has decided that he wants to remain a part of your household, and you're going to take this slave before Elohim. Now, whenever you do this, you've got to think about, where were the judges and the elders located? When you took a legal matter, where were they?
City gates?
City gates, or at this point when this all was written, there wasn't a city, so they were in
Tabernacle?
At the tabernacle. And God is
that's right, there wasn't it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's all in Exodus. All of these verses are in Exodus. So there's no city. They're still wandering. And they're at the tabernacle. Who's in the tabernacle?
Go ahead. Is that a rhetorical question?
Well, kind of, sort of.
God?
I'm used to lecturing to like a class full of people.
Don't wait on me to answer rhetorical questions.
Sorry.
It may or may not happen.
Well, this is true. So, okay, yeah, but God's in the tabernacle, and the grammar there can be either plural or singular, because Elohim is actually a plural noun, but when we use it as a proper name, then it's singular. So it works either way. So, when we say something like, I swear before God and everyone, what are we saying? There's kind of this acknowledgement that even though we're showing other people around us, God is still present. So the language can really work that way.
Uh-huh.
But the really big verses is Deuteronomy 32, 8 and 9. And this is where it gets interesting. And
do you have those?
I do.
Oh, here it is. I got it.
Read it.
Right here. When the Most High... Oh, I got a little close to the mic. Sorry. When the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, he divided mankind. He fixed the borders of the peoples according to the sons of God, but the Lord's portion is his people. Jacob is his allotted heritage. Sorry.
Okay. So the question we have to ask is, well, first of all, this is the song that Moses is singing right before he dies. This has been inspired by God himself. And we have to ask the question. You have something.
Oh, I was going to say, before we get into this, I want to just, this is funny to me. So I used Deuteronomy 32 as an example in my book. And so I looked over this passage so many times, but I still managed to miss this the first several times I read it. But once I realized how much theology was in it, I'm like, I can't even begin to go there with my book. Yeah, I just thought it was funny.
This is a song.
It's right in there. It's the psalm that God uses to teach Israel theology, and it's
what
amazing.
happens when God inspires good music. There's a lot of theology, but we could go on that rabbit trail for a while. When did God divide the nations? That's the question you have to ask here. So there's only one point in history that God divides the nations, and that is
Babel.
Migdal Babel. The Tower of Babel, specifically, found in Genesis 11, 1 through 9. And I think we kind of all know the story. The people had built a city. They're building a tower to the heavens. They're going to make a name for themselves. And God says, not going to happen. And then he scatters the nations, confuses the tongues. They're now, our word Babel, it means confusion and or just talk incoherently today. But that's not really what the word means, but it's just become so associated with that idea.
And they even named a movie after it.
This is true. I haven't seen it. But
I haven't seen it either. I heard it was pretty good, but...
Yeah. So if this is the only time that God divides the nations, Israel as a nation does not exist yet.
Right.
So he cannot set human judges over the nation of Israel. It has to be somebody other than mankind judging the nations. And so this is where we kind of start to get into the cosmology, and even the geography of it all.
Right, and even if you go even farther, he says he's divided the nations, divided mankind, fixed their borders of their people according to the sons of God. But if you take that to the sons of Israel, well, how many sons did Israel have? 12. There are more than 12 nations in the world. Mm-hmm. And there's even more than 12 listed. Isn't it in the Babel account, isn't there?
Well, depending on how you read it, it's 70 to 120, kind of depending on your division.
Yeah. So even that doesn't even make any sense whenever you really start going through it.
And both of those numbers in Jewish tradition actually have, in Gematria, which is we start to study the significance of numbers, these are completeness, wholeness is what they represent, both of them. So it really doesn't matter how you read it.
So it's not a literal number. He's saying God has it basically, so completeness, wholeness. God has, especially if you're looking at this, because one of the things that a lot of people ask, well, why did God put them under these nations? Were they supposed to serve these gods, and that's how they were going to get to heaven? And the answer is no. God put them there as a punishment. And so would it be a way? And this is just me asking a question. Would it be? This isn't rhetorical. It's just a question. Would it be saying that God has passed a complete judgment on these other nations? Is that a way of looking at it?
Yeah, because we don't have time to go into the Tower of Babel, but if you look at what's going on before this, the people at Babel, they are descendants of Ham. They are the ones that God cursed. And so they are in rebellion. Who's their leader? Nimrod. And he is the rebel king. So this is people who are outright defying God and in rebellion. And God says, great, you don't want anything to do with me and my law and the way I'm doing things? Get what you want. God's really good at that in the Bible. You want this?
Yeah.
Fine.
Yeah, and that's kind of funny. I mean, because that's actually a lot of how I feel like our dad was like, he'll tell you what he thinks is a good idea, or he would. We've already covered that. But he would tell he would talk through an issue. He would tell you what he thought, and then he would say, but you do what you want to do, and
I hope everything works out for the
Hope
best.
Hope for the best. So we would do either what he said or do the opposite, whichever way, just depending. And if it worked out, he would be real happy, and if not, he might make mention of his previous advice
while rubbing his stomach.
But
We're
doing this. That was his signature
that was the
move.
other one. Yeah. Dad. But if you think, okay, well, that's a little vague, I'm going to go back to Deuteronomy 4:19, 19 and 20. I know I'm like, this topic can get so deep. And so I want to be, I don't know what our time is, and I want to make sure we get it all in.
We're getting close on time, and
Okay.
I don't think we necessarily have to get it all in. We just need to paint a broad picture,
okay.
so just relax.
Well,
We got this.
I know, but there's so much, and I don't want to leave it all out. So,
We don't have a time limit. We just have a time
frame. Suggestion.
guidelines. Guidelines.
Suggestions, really. Deuteronomy 4:19 through 20 says, "Beware lest you raise your eyes to the heaven, and when you see the sun, the moon, the stars, and all the host of heaven, and you're drawn away to them, and serve things under them that the Lord your God has allotted to all the other peoples under the whole heaven." So God has allotted the sun, the moon, the stars, and the host of heavens to the other nations. But listen to the next part. "But the Lord has taken you out, brought you out of the iron furnace, out of Egypt, to be the people of his own inheritance, as you are this day." So God is saying, this is for everyone else. I'm going to create this nation of Israel. It's going to be the nation that that salvation is really going to come through.
Yeah, well, and not only that, he's saying, I'm going to take this tiny group of people. Start with Abram, his family, and his servants, and through this tiny group of people, I'm going to show how I am greater than all the other nations who have all the other people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's that reversal thing, like we talked about, and like we'll talk about when we get to the story of Hannah in a few weeks. I mean, that's really cool.
Well, and that's the thing. And so when you think about the other nations having these other gods, and I think their primary job, and based on Psalms 82, is that they were supposed to guide people back to the true God. And that when God says he's going to judge them and they're going to die like men, that the fact that they accepted worship for themselves, that they did not lead people back to the truth, now God's going to judge them. And we're going to have, this is where we start getting into kind of a cosmic showdown. And when we look at like the plagues of Egypt and the judgment on the gods,
Right.
Every plague, and I know there's some debate on this, but I have gone back and I've been convinced through research, God is taking a direct swipe at every major god of Egypt. And we might go into that one day because it's really fascinating. And so it becomes less about God being nitpicky with humanity and trying to hurt humans who displease him. It really becomes about God taking a stand against these spiritual forces that are manipulating humanity to serve their own means. And we can get into the Nephilim here. We can get into the Rephaim, the Anakim. The Anakim these are all related. They're all part of those beings that were created through angelic fathers and human mothers, talked about in Genesis 6, and who were the giants. And so whenever Joshua goes in to destroy Canaan and God says, kill everyone, man, woman, and child, he's not talking about killing people. If you notice every nation in there, those are nations who are the Anakim. They are the nation of giants. These are spiritual beings. And so anyway, we get into this where throughout history, God is starting to reveal himself. He's starting to take back little pieces of the world. We start with Israel, and then he begins to open up the minds of Israel once they've been set apart through the prophets. He's starting to say, now I'm putting you in a place to reclaim all the nations.
Right.
You're going to be this light of the world. You're going to pull everyone to you. And I think it's really interesting because in Isaiah, it's what he says. This is Isaiah 66:19, "For I know their works and their thoughts. A time is coming to gather all nations and all tongues."
Uh-huh.
Why is the mention of tongues so important there?
Because we're back to Babel.
We're back to Babel.
Yeah, and that's interesting because then it also makes it makes the story more interesting. Not just more interesting, but it makes it more clear that it's not just, oh, well, this is just about, oh, we made God mad because we didn't follow the rules. And so now we've got to figure out how to get back into heaven. It's not about that, or get to heaven, not back in. I don't know if that's a whole nother topic. But, it's not just about getting people into heaven. It's about God's glory in the earth and going beyond just the pie on the sky. This is what happens after we die. It makes it more tangible, more real, and more of going and more driving out evil from the world.
Well, and that's what Acts 2 is really about. Whenever the apostles are there preaching, or at the Pentecost celebration of Pentecost, the wind comes. There's the tongues of fire over their head. The miracle is now, instead of different languages being confusing, God actually overrides the language distinction so that everyone can hear in their own language. The fixed boundaries are no longer an obstacle, and the whole book of Acts is just pointing to, like we said, the number 70 and 120 were completion, and these were the nations, and that's actually included in Genesis 11, a table of nations. Now, Acts goes back and says, basically, the whole world as we know it is going to be reached with the gospel.
Now, that's kind of interesting. I was thinking about the tongues thing, where you were talking about how everyone understood in their own language, and I wonder if that's possibly like a route to, and it probably is. Now that I'm thinking about it, it's probably actually a pretty obvious answer. Like the route to Christianity being a translated faith. The fact that you don't have to convert to a specific cultural norm, you don't have to adopt a specific language, because there are certain religious texts in the world that the people say if you don't read it in the original language, you're not really reading it, and you can't be blessed by it. You can't enter heaven without knowing it in the original language. And so I wonder if that's probably somewhat of the root of that.
I hadn't really considered it, but I mean, that makes sense that God would not be bound by a single language. I mean, if the confusing of language was his punishment, then he can override it, and that's what makes him right. There's a testimony of his power. Right. That's what makes him greater than a God that would say, "No, you got to know it in my language."
Yeah, that's cool. Sorry.
Yeah,
sorry, that just observation to pop right in there. So.
No, it works. I just want to hit this is not just an Old Testament thing too, either. Acts 2, Paul talks about it. He says it's our inheritance. And then Hebrews, again, the writer of Hebrews talks about it. Peter talks about it. But the one I thought was very interesting was John in the book of Revelations. This is chapter 1, verses 4 and 8. Grace and peace from him who is, and who was, and who is to come, and from the seven spirits who were before the thrones, members of the Divine Council, and from Jesus Christ, the faithful witness, the firstborn of the dead, and the ruler of the kings of earth. Notice, Jesus is going to take that place, the ruler of the kings of earth. I love that.
Yeah.
To him who lives with us and has freed us from our sins by his blood and made us a kingdom of priests. That's also part of that Isaiah 66 prophecy, that we're a kingdom of priests. To be glory and dominion forever and ever. Amen. Behold, he is coming with the clouds, and every eye shall see him, even those who pierced him, and all the tribes of the earth will wail on account of him. So all the tribes, this is the fulfillment. When God has reached into all the earth, everyone has had a chance to see his glory. And Isaiah says that even those nations that do not know his fame, they're going to know about him, because God is going to take back the nations from these little e Elohim, these godlets, as I like to call them.
Godlets.
It's either godlets or godkin. You got to come up so it's not so confusing. But so they are no longer going to be in control. Jesus is going to regain power, and we talk about this aspect in the church today. We just don't put it in this concise of a form.
Well, yeah, and we also don't put it in. We put it in terms of just humans, like it's so.
But what does Paul say? Paul says we don't fight against flesh and blood,
right?
Powers and thrones and principalities.
I know, and then, but yeah, it's just so bizarre to me it does, like you said, it makes things, it decentralizes humans in the world stage, but it really kind of elevates like how much God cared for us. It's a lot to think about.
Yeah, and if you do sit down and just think about it sometime, that God would care for us so much that even though these quote unquote greater beings out there, we're going to judge them. Paul says that we're going to judge the angels.
Yeah.
And we're going to be a part of that process. And that, the angels, there's a psalm that supposedly an angel wrote that says, "Who is man that
you should be mindful of him?"
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's something, the judging angels thing, that's something that I heard this evangelistic preacher who was talking about, what are we going to do when we get to heaven? And what he said was that we're just going to start our day. We're just going to stand in awe of Jesus and how amazing he is for every day, for the rest of eternity. That's all we're going to do. And I'm like going, where do you find that in the Bible? Because Paul says we're going to be judging angels. We got work to do. And so, but in the context of that, what Paul was talking about, he's talking about a dispute where Christians had appealed to an outside authority and filed basically a lawsuit. And Paul says, no, get it together. Figure out how to use your discernment, because practice good judgment, because in the life to come, we're going to be judging angels. So that if nothing else, get nothing else practical out of this, start using good judgment in your life. I mean, that's what we're supposed to do. That's our job.
Well, and I think, we've kind of hit some of the high points. I know there's going to be so much more. I think if there's questions, ask us questions, but by all means, check out Dr. Heiser's stuff.
Nakedbible.com. Definitely worth checking out. I've listened to most of that podcast twice because it's that good.
Yeah.
And there's what, close to 300 episodes.
Oh yeah. But I mean, he went through Leviticus and it was still interesting. So,
oh yeah. Yeah. If nothing else, just to dive into the text and get some scholastic information, even if you disagree with him, it's important to know what's out there. If you disagree with us on this, and again, this doesn't affect your salvation where you land on this, but I think it really kind of, when you get to looking at the overall picture of things, like I said, it's like watching a trailer versus watching a movie.
Yeah, and if you make it to heaven and all of a sudden God says, "Hey, by the way, you didn't know about the Divine Council Worldview," it's not going to disqualify you from getting in.
No, not at all.
It's probably not even going to be first and foremost on his mind. If you get to heaven and find out it's right, you aren't really going to care either.
Right.
So.
And if you get to heaven and God goes, all the Divine Council stuff, what were you thinking? I'd be like, I don't know.
Hey, I made it. And so
Christ is my only plea.
And I think that's the bottom line. And we don't want to get too distracted from that ever in our walk. But I think whenever you can find something like this that helps you unlock some of the hows and whys, that's always going to make the text more interesting.
Yeah, and to me, it just gives another sense of awe and wonder to, hey, there's more going on in this world than just what I see right in front of my face.
Well, and I think that's the important thing. If your Bible study is not leading you there, you probably are doing it wrong.
Right. Great. So I think that's a good place to wrap up because we are getting close to an hour. So I guess we'll see you next time. Next week is actually our interview. Okay. So that's going to be, I didn't realize at the beginning of the show, so we're going to go ahead and announce that. That's with Tandy Adams from After the Music Stops podcast. That's a podcast by worship leaders for worship leaders, and it's about, just kind of building community and letting people know that, hey, people in leadership are just people too. Go check that out. It's a lot of fun. After the Music Stops, and then we'll be talking to Tandy next week, or we talked to her last night, but you'll be hearing about it. You'll be hearing it next week. So in the meantime, feel free to contact us with any questions, comments, complaints to Emily, and to me, I guess. Well, we'll be fair. So that's ravencreeksc.com, which can also get you to Raven Creek SC on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Find us there. If you like what you heard, hit subscribe. If you really like what you heard, write us a review on iTunes. If you really, really like what you heard, soon we will have patreon.com/RavenCreekSC up and available for you to shower us with a couple dollars. So
pennies, hundreds of pennies.
any support would be appreciated. And just so you know, I'm going to just throw this out there. Emily and I will never make claims that God's going to bless you beyond measure for giving any money to us. We're just going to say
God's a good God.
God's a good God. But if you feel like giving to us, that's great. If not, that's great too. And by all means, if you are, looking to give to us to get some kind of financial blessing, we're not going to guarantee that.
I hope God does it for you. I really do.
But we appreciate any support. We're just out here, and we know that if God doesn't provide for this, or if you guys don't provide for it, then it's not going to happen. So, because there are some costs involved in this. But anyway, hit us up with questions, comments, suggestions, and we will be glad to
tackle most of them.
As many as we can.
Within reason.
Within reason. So, anyway, thanks for joining us. You guys have a great week, and we'll see you next week. We'll be here with Tandy Adams. Thanks. Bye.
You've been listening to the Faith and Other Oddities podcast, a Raven Creek Social Club production. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If you like what you've heard, please write us a review on iTunes or consider supporting us on patreon.com/RavenCreekSC. As always, thank you for listening, and don't forget to join us next week.